Before we ask for Pancasila and Tisarana request, we bow to Bante Jayasara. Okasa Wandami Bante. That we recite Pancasila Aradhana Parita. Okasa ahang bante tisaranena sating Pancasila dhammang yacami anugahang katwa silang detame bante dutiyampi okasa ahang bante tisaranena sating Pancasila dhammang yacami anugahang katwa silang detame bante tatiyampi okasa ahang bante tisaranena sating Pancasila dhammang yacami anugahang katwa silang detame bante
Yamahang vadami sangvideta
ama bante
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Buddhang saranang gacchami
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tisarana sampurnang
Ama bhante.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang sammadhiyami.
Adinna dana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Adinadana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Kamesu miccāchāra veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Kamesu miccāchāra veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Musavada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Musawada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Sura merya majjappamaddattana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Suramiraya majjapamadatthana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami.
Tisiranena sadding panchasilang dhammang samadhiyatva sadhukang surakitang katva appamadena sampadeta bang.
Amma Bhante
Silena sukating yanti, silena bhoga sampada, silena nibbuting yanti, tasma silang visodaye.
Amma Bhante Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu. And now let's us recite Dhamma Desana Aradhana. Brahma Jaloka Dipati Sahampati Katanjali Andiwarang Ayachata Santi Dasata Parajatika Desetu Dhammang Anukampimang Pajang.
Oh, okay, it works now. So, good evening, morning, friends, wherever you may be. And okay, very good. So I wanted to talk about a topic. In English, the word is uncertainty. Do you know what's the word in your language?
Ketidakpastian.
What's that?
Ketidakpastian.
Ketidakpastian?
Yeah.
Ketidakpastian, right? No, this is a word and a phenomena that's actually very, very familiar for all of us human beings, no matter what language, no matter what what country we're from, going back all the way even to our ancestors. And I don't mean from Asia or Europe or anything like that. I mean going way back, all the way, thousands and thousands, dozens of thousands of years ago, right? We've had to deal with this reality of life called uncertainty. Okay? What does this mean, uncertainty? This means is that we don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? We know what happened in the past. And oftentimes what we'll do is we will actually base the future off what happened in the past, right? And so we will have, because of certain things that happened in the past, we'll have fears for the future, right? We will be thinking often about what might happen in the future and how that might affect you or your family members or your society or anything like that, right? So we have these uncertainties in life. Okay? These days, you see it, at least in America. I don't know about Indonesia and other places in the world, but in America, you hear people say that we live in uncertain times, right? But if you know the teachings of the Buddha, if you understand this, then you understand that we are always in uncertain times, right? We live immersed in uncertainty. Now, if you live in a place like America, we've done a lot of things, right, to minimize uncertainty. In places where, so for instance, right, we can wake up and we can turn on the lights. We have electricity, right? We have working plumbing. We have all these kinds of things, right, that minimize our uncertainty. We have government. We have police that help us, against robbers. We have government that help us with certain things. We as human beings have created all of these systems, right, that help us to minimize the uncertainty of life. But in reality, it's always there. That's our job. We're trying to fight against the uncertainty. We're trying to, we want to try to minimize any uncertain bad things from happening. This is what we do. This is our tendency. But if you think about the teachings of the Buddha, think about the number one term, the number one teaching of the Buddha that has to do with uncertainty, right? Pali word is anicca. We know that as impermanence, right? So Buddha tells us everything conditioned is impermanent. And this word has become, we've become so used to this word that we kind of, it's lost its meaning, especially in the West, among like what we call new age types and people who are kind of getting into spirituality, like everything's impermanent, man, and all these kind of things, right? So we don't really understand, we don't really know this word anicca. We don't really truly understand that everything is what? Everything is changing. Everything is flowing. Everything, nothing is staying the same for long. Right? We don't understand this. And so when things happen in our lives, that things change, we lose our jobs, something happens, we lose, we have a relationship when we break up or something like that, or we have kids and they get older and then they move out of the house, right? All these kind of various changes in our lives, we don't like them. We suffer because of them, right? We don't like these changes. We like stability, right? We like things to be the same, even though we say we might be bored with it, right? And we want something to happen. Some people will say like, I'm bored, I want something to happen, right? And then something does happen and they really don't like what happened because it turned out that it wasn't good. It was something that they didn't want to happen, right? So when we truly understand, Buddha says that impermanence is a characteristic of existence. There's three characteristics of existence, we know, right? Anicca, dukkha, anatta, right? Anicca, impermanence; dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, suffering; and anatta, not self, right? There's no permanent soul or being that is in existence, right? So Buddha says very clearly that these three things are characteristics of existence, means they are part of this existence, right? As soon as we are born, we are subject to anicca, to impermanence. We really want to, it's kind of like now, this year, 2020, we've been in such uncertainty, quote unquote, that we have lots of fears, right? And we wish that we want our government officials, we want our scientists, we want people to know exactly what to do and how to do everything, right? But the truth is, they don't. Right? Especially with something that's happening these days, like with COVID-19, it's something that's not really, it was pretty new, right? So they have to study it and understand it. And people have to figure out what's the right thing to do. But see, it's kind of like when we were growing up, right? When we were children, we looked up to our parents because our parents were the world to us. Our parents knew exactly what to do to keep us safe and to make sure everything was all right, right? And so as adults, we don't grow out of that. We go from thinking that our parents should be able to do that to our governments and our politicians and our workers and all these people. They should be able to do this, right? Because we crave this this certainty. We crave some kind of parental figure that will make sure everything's all right. And the truth is, especially if you've, if you're older now, if you are an adult and maybe years into being an adult, you probably went through a period of time where you realize, oh, wait, when you maybe 20s or 30s and you realize, oh, my parents know about as much as I do now. Right? My parents are just regular human beings, just like me. They just came into this world and they learned and they lived, and that's all they know, just like me. Right? But the truth is, if you look up the word anicca in the Pali English dictionary, with most Pali words, you'll see that there's actually multiple ways that you can translate into English this word. And for many years, I didn't look, until I was almost a monk, I didn't look, oh, what is this? Let me look up in the Pali English dictionary what this word means, right? And of course, the first definition is impermanence. But I actually had a very deep insight when I saw the second definition. The second way that you can translate anicca into English is unstable, undependable, right? Nicca, the Pali word nicca means stable, dependable. Usually when you put an A in front of it, that negates it, right? So anatta is not self, atta is self, right? So that's how that usually works in Pali. But so this definition, right? So Buddha is saying that everything conditioned, so everything, the only thing that is not conditioned is nibbana. So everything in your experience as a being going through samsara, being in samsara, is conditioned. And so the Buddha is saying everything conditioned is anicca. Think about the other word. Everything conditioned is unstable, undependable. When I first read that, it was very impactful to me, because then I started to realize what the Buddha is saying with this word. Is your body dependable? Right? Or is it undependable? Right? Maybe when you're young and strong and healthy and beautiful, your body's very dependable, quote unquote. We like our bodies. But then as we get older, things start to fall apart. Your eyesight starts to go a little bit. You start to get some gray hairs. Your body starts to ache. Your back and this, right? Or even if you are young and healthy, you get sick, right? Your body is not stable. Your body is not dependable. Your body is what? Subject to change. The Buddha says that all things that are conditioned, they arise, they persist for a time with alteration, which means that so persist for a time with alteration means this. You were born, right? When you were just born, you were like this. You were a little baby, right? And then you became like an adult. And then as you get older, you get a little smaller, right? So when you become very, very old. So this is what means by persisting with alteration, right? Things can last for a long time, but they're changing while that's happening, right? So things are arising, they're persisting with alteration, and then eventually they cease, right? In the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, where the Buddha is, his final passing away, in the scene of the final passing away, when the Buddha is extinguished, it says people were rending their hair and beating their breast and crying and rolling on the ground, right? Saying, oh, has the life of the teacher ended too early, right? The teachings, the teacher's life has ended too early for us. But then it talks about how there are these beings who were sitting peacefully in the corner, right? Men and women and monastics, etc. And they were patient. They were peaceably and patiently, and they were abiding, saying, the teacher taught us that everything that arises must cease. Just so. Right? So there's the difference, right? Between this is the regular person, the Patujana. I'm not an Arya Sangha, so I'm still a Patujana myself, even though I'm a monk, right? Anybody, unless you're an Arya, you're a Patujana, right? So, but for the Patujana, the regular person, when we have a change that we don't like, we suffer. We are very we're sad, we're angry, we're depressed, all of these kinds of different changes. But for somebody who really understands anicca, not just intellectually like you read it in the book, but experientially, somebody who has become an Arya Sangha, who's become a wise being, they understand, this is just the rising and ceasing of conditions. Right? But we're not there yet. but we can understand where the Buddha is coming from. So what about your body is not dependable, right? What about your car, right? Or your whatever you use. If you don't have a car, maybe you live in a city and you use a subway or a bus. Are those dependable? How many times are there all kinds of delays and problems and things like that? If you have your own car, it breaks down, all kinds of things. What about your partner or your spouse? Is that dependable? Are they fully dependable? Will you be with them forever? You don't know. Even if you stayed all together forever in this lifetime, when you die, there's a separation, right? So everything, you can really look at everything in existence, everything in experience, and you can think to yourself, what is there that is dependable? What is there that I can hold on to and it will stay, right? What is there that will not change on me? And as I was contemplating this, I had a very strong vision come to my mind. And the vision was that I was part of like a ship that went down in the ocean, and I was struggling to swim in the ocean, and I was trying to grab at what they call flotsam, so like wood and pieces of the ship or whatever that are floating in the water, right? And every time I tried to grab onto one and push myself out of the water, it broke apart and I fell back in the water, right? Every time I tried to grab for something, it would break apart. And I realized, oh, yes, I understand, right? There's nothing that I could grab onto that would keep me out of that water. There's nothing that I could hold on to. There's nothing that I could depend on. There's nothing that I could take refuge in this conditioned world that would keep me from slipping, from drowning. Anything that I would try to hold on to, if you try to like put your hand in water and grasp it, try to hold the water, what happens? It all just comes right out and it just comes down. You can't hold on to it. Well, this is the same. This is what the Buddha is telling us. This is the nature of existence. And so it's a kind of an ironic joke that when you take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, what you're really taking refuge in is the teaching that there is no conditioned refuge. Okay? The only ultimate refuge, and this is the Buddha says, the ultimate freedom from bondage is what? Nibbana. Right? That's the only refuge. Right? And that's where the teaching leads us. Whether we're a layperson or a monk in this life, whether it doesn't matter, eventually the teaching, if we practice it from life to life, and it leads us to awakening. Right? It leads us to ending our samsaric journey. It leads us to the only true refuge, the only freedom, the only true freedom. Right? So this is something that is important for us to understand when it comes to the Buddhist teachings, right? That we understand that anicca is part of life, right? And of course, because we're not awakened beings, we should also understand and have compassion for ourselves, and we realize that we are not awakened beings yet, and because things happen, because we have loss, we'll have dukkha, we'll have suffering. That's okay. Like, for instance, I'm a monk, right? But I still have a mother. I still have somebody who brought me into this world, and a father. Right? And they brought me into this world, and they taught me how to live well in the world and all these kind of things, right? Even though I've been practicing meditation for 15, 16 years, and I've been a Buddhist 12 or 13, of course, when they die, of course, I'll have suffering because of it. I'll have dukkha because I have this attachment and this connection with them. And that's okay, right? Now, will I suffer as much as, will I suffer as much as somebody who's never meditated and who's never practiced? No, definitely not. Because I've practiced and I've started to develop insight and I've started to understand, right? But I also understand that I still have this attachment. It's part of being, being born as a human. It's being part of being born in samsara, is that you have these attachments. It's just the way it is. And so one of the things, I'm doing an Ajahn Brahm here. My robe is falling apart. Okay, there we go. So this is what happens when you go like this. I don't know, in Indonesia, do they do a lot of this? Okay. And I'm from an Italian family, so we do a lot of this. So how do we, it's all well and good to understand the Buddha says that, this is the way it is, so we should be okay with uncertainty. It's all well and good to think that, but it doesn't really work for us yet, right? Because we don't have the insight to fully understand it. So we have to kind of really practice and understand the Buddhist teachings and then try to implement them into our daily lives and how we deal with uncertainty, right? So we deal, right now, what is it? It's like 10 o'clock. Come in. It's almost 10 o'clock here in the East Coast of America, right? So I don't know if I'm going to be alive by 11 o'clock. I mean, chances are I will be. Hopefully I'll be alive, but I don't know, right? Nobody knows. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if by the end of the day we'll have our jobs or anything, right? So how do we live with this understanding, right? How do we live without being so fear-struck and being so, what they call catatonic, so frozen, like in fright, that we don't know what to do. And so this is where we have to be very brave, right? A Buddhist practitioner, somebody who follows the Noble Eightfold Path, has a lot of courage, right? Is very brave because they understand this is not easy. It's not easy to follow the path. Right? The Buddha tells us this path goes against the stream, right? With a stream of normal people, normal society, normal ways of doing things, right? This path goes against the stream. So if we're practicing, we're going against it. We're going against the normal, everyday ways of how we think things should be and how we want things to be, right? It's a very hard practice, but it's one that has lots of benefits and is very good. It's very beneficial for yourself and others. So think about, today, right? What happens, from after this talk is over and after everything's over, think about the first thing that's going to happen to your mind when you think of a fear, right? Are there going to be riots today, or am I going to be catch COVID today, or anything like that, right? Think about how that arises and watch that. That's an opportunity for you to practice, right? You can observe how that affects your mind, right? You can observe how it affects your body, the fear response in the body, right? you have to be able to understand it before you can do anything about it. Right? So you want to reflect on this. The Buddha tells me everything is impermanent. The Buddha tells me that there's no guarantees. There's no refuge, right? So how can I live in this, right? What can I do? So working with your fears is very important, right? There's a wonderful sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya number 4. It's called Fear and Dread, right? And we're so used to thinking about the Buddha as this mighty, powerful, awakened being, right? That can go everywhere and can do all kinds of things. But in this sutta, the Buddha talks about before he was awakened, right? And how he would be in places, he would be meditating in places like graveyards, charnel grounds, in the wood at night and all kinds of stuff like that. And he would have fear. Right? And so, whoa, the Buddha had fear just like us, right? That's an amazing thing. And so the Buddha would talk about, how he would be in the woods. And then he would hear a sound and he would get fearful, right? This is something that I have experienced with myself as somebody who, when I was becoming a monk and before I was a monk, I read the suttas about monks who went into the jungles, and I, read all the stories of the wandering monks in Thailand. And I was like, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be able to go into the jungle and things like that, right? And so I, would be meditating by myself in the woods, up in the mountains at night, right? Just all by myself in the darkness. And I'd hear a noise and I'd be like this. And I'd be so fearful. But most of the time, you know what that noise was? It was a little squirrel, right? It was a little thing. We have, the fear and the anxiety made it bigger. And I even remember one time I was meditating, the full moon. It was a posted, it was beautiful. I was meditating and I heard a noise and I got so afraid and I turned around and it was a baby deer. And guess who was more afraid, me or the deer? No, the deer was more afraid. I freaked the deer out. The deer went like this and just shot off, right? And I realized, oh, whoa, this is weird how I was the one who was the most, that everybody was afraid of me. And I thought I was afraid of everybody else, right? And so the Buddha has a similar experience where he reflects on this and he says, if there were a peacock or something, some animal that comes, even an animal that's not even, we're not talking about lions and tigers and bears. We're talking about something minor. He says, even such, this animal comes, he asks himself this wonderful, very human question. Why does my mind go to fear and dread? Right? So he asks himself, why does my mind always go to the worst possible situation? Right? A thought arises. Like I can remember when I was a layperson and I was at work, and I remember I was walking and I was meditating outside during a break, and a coworker, was walking by and he says, "Oh, your boss wants to talk to you." All right. And then, my mind started to think about all the things like I either did wrong or I didn't do well enough. Or I'm like, oh, the boss wants to yell at me and all these kind of things, right? But then when I go speak to the boss actually wanted to praise me for a good job I was doing. I was like, oh, okay. Right? So this is the thing. We have this kind of natural tendency, right? This very, through our evolution, right? For ancient ancestors, go back, my major in college was anthropology, archaeology. I like studying human cultures and things like that. So this is, just like the Buddha was from the Khattiya class, he was from the warriors and rulers. So lots of his similes are about, chariots and elephants and things like that. This is, we tell what we know. And so understanding this nature that we were evolved, we grew up, as we became humans. What happens if we're in like Africa 100,000 years ago, or even in the European steppes or somewhere in Asia, right? Long time ago, before we had civilization and technology, right? There were all kinds of things that could kill us. All kinds of creatures and animals, and even other humans, and even other types of humans, Neanderthals, all kinds of things, right? So our mind evolved to think negative. Our mind evolved to think the worst possible thing could happen, because it's better that you think the worst possible thing could happen and it doesn't, than you don't think it could happen and then you get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something like that, right? So we have to understand, first of all, that our mind always goes to the negative, always goes to the fearful, right? And if we understand that, we're already a step ahead. That's a very beneficial, wonderful thing that we understand that, right? So we can reflect on, if something happens today, your boss calls you or whatever, you think your mind is automatically going to go to the worst. But try to reflect on that. Okay, is this really, just like the Buddha, when he was in the charnel grounds at night 2,600 years ago, as a practitioner, and he had the fear, and it was just the little, that peacock or that small thing. Now, of course, big things can come after us, right? We can get cancer, right? We can get COVID and die from it. We can be walking in the street and we can get run over. So of course, things can happen, right? But if you really look at it, most of the time we spend worrying is over nothing eventually. Most of the time we spend worrying, nothing happens, or at least not so bad. And I started to understand this even before I was a Buddhist. When I was just kind of investigating my mind and seeing this, I actually came up with what I called like the positive thought mantra. And so this would be something I would reflect to myself every day about the power of thinking positive, and even if something negative were to happen, I started to understand that if I went into a bad situation with a positive mind state, then it would still be better off than if I went in with a negative mind state. Right? Because with our mind, we can make many things worse. If we have pain, we really think about it and we worry about it, and actually we make the pain worse. Right? So this is something that's very important to understand and to reflect upon as we go through. We live in uncertainty, right? There's no escaping until you become awakened and then you parinibbana. There's no escaping uncertainty, right? As long as you're in samsara, there's no escaping it, right? So do we just keep trying to run away from it forever, from life to life, keep running away? Or do we start to understand it and face it, and we realize, okay, we're in an uncertain life. Now, how is the best what for me to do? What's the best way for me to live, right? And, the Buddha has an answer for this. There's a wonderful sutta. It's called Pabbatopama Sutta. It's the simile of the mountains. And in this simile of the mountains, the Buddha is talking to a king. I don't remember if it was Pasenadi, Bimbisara. I don't remember which one, but he was talking to one of the kings. And the Buddha says to the king, what would you do, O king, if your scouts came in from all four directions, right, from the north, the south, and the east, and the west, and your scouts said, that, O king, there are mountains coming in from all four sides, as tall as the sky, crushing everything in its wake. Right? What would you do? And so the king, who was a disciple of the Buddha, who was a practitioner, was very wise. And he said, what is there to do but to practice Dhamma, to live skillfully, right? To live by the Noble Eightfold Path. And so the Buddha says, I exhort you, O king, I tell you, old age, sickness, and death are coming in like mountains coming in, tall as the sky, crushing everything in its weight. What can you do? And the king says, practice Dhamma. Right? So anytime that you're in a very uncertain situation, anytime that you are very fearful, what can you do? You can think about the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. You can think about this teaching. You can reflect, right? The Buddha, there's a sutta called Crest of the Standard. That's the way Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it. And the Buddha talks about how, King Saka, the king of the Devas. And, in the suttas, you can see him fighting with the Asuras. The Devas and the Asuras are fighting all the time. And King Saka says, to the people, the Devas fighting under him, he says, if you are fearful, look to my banner, right? And then your fear will dissipate. You know what a banner is? You ever see, like in Europe or Japan or China, they have big, like the image of the ruler or the kingdom or whatever, right? You look to those banners, the people who are holding the banner, right? As a way to build up your morale and your courage, right? And so the Buddha's telling the monks, he's telling the story, and he says, do you think, monks, that just because Saka says that this will take your fear away, that it will? And they say, no, Bhante. And he says, the Tathagata has become fully awakened, has destroyed greed, hatred, and delusion, etc., etc. He says, when you are fearful, right, when you are in doubt, look to my crest, to my standard, the Buddha says, right? And what is the Buddha's standard? What is the Buddha's crest? Actually, he goes through Itipiso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddha, right? So it's the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, right? So when you're very fearful and you're very in uncertainty, you reflect on the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. You reflect on the teachings, right? You reflect, okay, I don't know what's going to happen, and I have fear, just like the Buddha did, right? Before he was awakened, I have fear. It's okay, right? What should I do? How should I live, right? You use the Dhamma as your guide, just like the king who said, when everything is coming in, when old age, sickness, and death are coming in, all you can do is practice Dhamma, right? It's the same thing when you live in a world where everything is uncertain. You don't know. It's okay, right? So you practice Dhamma and you try to live as best as you can in line with the teachings, right? And if you do that, then at least you're doing the best you can, and you're doing it as skillfully as you can, right? No matter what happens. So I think it's 10:30. I went a little bit over, but that's all right. I think it's time now. We can stop and we can do Q&A. So yeah, thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante, for the Dhamma talk today, this morning. It's very, very wonderful and very good. Okay, and we're gonna open the next sessions for questions to all friends in Zoom. So if you would like to ask questions of Bhante, please raise your hand. There's a feature on the bottom of the screens. Under participants, if you're using laptop, there's a raise hand feature. Or if you're using a phone, it's also on the bottom right hand side. So,
Harita.
Yeah. Okay, Harita, are you? I've seen your the first person who's gonna ask the question. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Anumurana. Bhante, what is your favorite mantra if you are of sudden in fear or in worry? Thank you.
Actually, my favorite mantra in terms of fear is my recollection on death, reflecting that I'm going to die. That's that's something that is actually very kind of peaceful to me. This is why I actually suggest that people do practice mindfulness of death practices, because at first it's very scary and it's not so pleasant, right? You might get grossed out and fearful, But if you practice it for many, many years, then that actually helps you. It brings you back to reality. It brings you back to, oh, yeah, I don't have a lot of time in this life. I'm going to die. What's the most important thing for me to do? Why am I worried about this? Why am I, thinking too much about this? Right? So that actually kind of centers me, right? The reflection on that I don't have all the time in the world, right? The younger you are, the more time you think you have. Then as you get older, then you start to realize I don't have that much time, right? So, but using the reflection on, I'm going to die. Right? One of my most favorite reflections is Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it as themes, and Bhante Sujato translates it as subjects for contemplation. Right? The 5 subjects of contemplation. To me, that's for the regular person in an average day, that's probably the most important thing to reflect on, right? And the 5 reflections are that I am subject to old age. I'm not exempt from old age. I'm subject to illness. I'm not exempt from illness. I'm subject to death. I'm not exempt from death, right? All that is beloved and pleasing to me, everybody, every person, everything that I love, I'll be separated from. Right? And the 5th is that I'm the owner of my actions, right? So when you reflect on these, I think that helps you to center, right? That helps you to reflect, and you understand, oh, okay, right? I'm subject to these things. This is the samsara that I'm in, right? That this is what I'm dealing with. So let me keep these reflections close, so that I can have the zeal and the desire to practice well, to be very skillful in the world, right? So that I can practice Dhamma, I can live Dhamma, and then eventually, maybe not in this life, maybe not in the next 10 lives, but eventually I can become awakened, right? So this is very important, to keep a reflection like this. 5 subjects for contemplation. Buddha says, he starts out with in the sutta, he says, whether you are a woman or a man, lay or ordained, one should reflect upon these things often, right? So often to the Buddha could mean, depending on some suttas, it could mean basically every 5 seconds, literally, right? Or it could mean at least once a day. Reflect on this. When you wake up, the Buddha, one of the mindfulness of death practices, reflections, is when you wake up, you think, I may die today. There are many ways that I may die. And Buddha goes through all kinds of things, like, scorpions and poison and all kinds of stuff. And obviously today it would be like, I could be run over by a car, a plane could crash into me. I don't know, all kinds of things. But having these reflections is very important, because it actually brings, you practice it enough, it brings you peace. Right? Because I can remember when a couple of years ago, when I'd be walking down the street at Bhavana in the woods, and cars would come by. And what we do at the monastery, the tradition is you wave to people and you give them metta, you send them metta, right? And I can remember being very, for some reason, I had walked these roads for years, 5-6 years, and I had never had any fear about the cars coming up behind me. But I started to have lots of fear about the cars coming up behind me. And then one time, my mind said, my death is coming for me, right? And to the average person, I would be like, oh my God, I'm afraid. But actually, because I had been practicing this Dhamma for so long, my fear went away. Oh, yeah, I could die. It's okay. No, I'm not quite that yet, but it really calmed my mind to reflect that, yeah, this might be my death coming for me, and it's okay, right? So these practices, reflecting on, if you do any reflection or any contemplation or any mantra, it's that. Do the 5 subjects for contemplation every day, right? Because this will help you to understand what's most important in life, right? And then how to live most important in life. This is why the Buddha gives us many of these wonderful reflections for this purpose, for us to develop zeal in the practice, to want to practice well and skillfully. So eventually we get out of samsara. So I think that's my answer there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bante. Thank you, Ms. Arita. The next question will come from Miss Lian Pignon. Silakan, Bu.
Halo, dengar ya Kak Sony?
Ya, silakan, Bu.
Ya, Wandami Bante, saya Lian dari Arizona. I'm Lian from Arizona. Sorry, I speak Indonesian. I have a question. As a Buddhist, we believe with the 3 marks of existence, which is dukkha, anicca, and anatta. So my question is, within these 3, which one is more important so we can cope with our daily life so easily? Because as an awakening, we have so many problems in our life and sometimes we struggle. So by knowing this, maybe we can more focus or something like. I just would like to know, but which one is more important within this 3 mark? Thank you.
Oh, that's a tough one because I don't know that there is one that's more important. Especially the Buddha says that if you see one, you see the other 3. Right? So what I would say is there might be one that works best for you. There might be one that you have a proclivity to see the most or to understand the easiest. And so you can focus on that one.
Okay.
Right? And if one works for you the most, then and it seems to be helping you and benefiting you and bringing you towards lessening your suffering, then focus on that one. So really because the Buddha says, if you see one, you see all 3. Just like the Buddha says, if you see the Dhamma, you see me, you see me, you see the Dhamma. It's the same because anicca, dukkha, and anatta are, what would you say? I can't say 2 sides of the same coin because there's 3 of them, but they're essentially a triangle, right? They're a triangle. It means they're together, they're connected, right? The reason because everything is impermanent, because everything is anicca, right? If we attach to it, what do? We create dukkha. If we hold on to it, we create dukkha.
Yes.
And when we understand, because if everything is anicca, how can there be some kind of a permanent self, right? So it's a logical system that the Buddha has given to us, right? So if anicca is where the rest of it flows from, but so if everything is anicca, if everything is unstable, impermanent, then there's no possibility that there could be this permanent soul that we hold on to. So that's one of the other things that as a before, as when you become a sotapanna, you let go of identity view, but not until you become an arahant do you fully let go of this, of conceit I am, right? So all of these 3 things are like a triangle. You can't break one from the other, right? They're all connected and they're all part of the same understanding, the same insight, the same, wisdom.
Okay.
So if there's one particular that you feel calls to you the most, then follow that path because all 3 of them will lead the same place, right? All 3 of them will go to, will lead you to awakening because they're all 3 part of characteristics of existence.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kasoni.
Thank you, William. Okay, Paul, do you have questions?
For kids like me, what should I think about when I'm meditating, and what should I feel afterwards, and is meditating important?
What you should think about when you're meditating. You don't have to worry about thinking about anything. Your mind's going to think about things. That's normal, right? So when you meditate, right? So the most traditional way that the Buddha taught how to sit and meditate is following your breath, the anapanasati, right? So as the breath is coming in, the breath is going out, and you follow the breath, right? And then, okay, you start, I'm going to meditate. you follow your breath 1, 2, 3, 4 times. By the 5th time, your mind went somewhere else. Your mind's thoughts came. You started thinking about, I don't know, Indonesia or Paris or wherever, or Hawaii. You went somewhere, right? And that's normal. That's perfectly normal. That is actually, you didn't do anything wrong, nor did you fail as a meditator. See, this is what I'm telling you. I didn't know. Nobody told me this in the beginning. So it was really hard for me in the beginning. I felt really bad. Like I felt like a failure and all kinds of things, right? So it's very important that you understand that this is normal, right? We have, do you know what the Buddha says, what our mind is like? Do you know what the Buddha says, what our mind is like? Like an animal? Monkey mind. Yes. Just like a monkey jumps from tree to tree, our mind goes from thought to thought, from experience to experience, right? So this is actually part of the practice. You understand that this is normal, right? So when you sit down, if you're following your breath, you're going to be distracted, right? So what you want to do when you're distracted, you don't want to get angry and try to push it away, right? You know, say, I don't know, what's your favorite food?
Rice.
Rice. Okay. So say you're meditating and then you start thinking about rice, right? And rice comes up, right? Not, you don't want to get like angry and think, oh, I shouldn't be thinking about rice. I'm a bad Buddhist. I'm going to put, you know, I'm really angry. I'm going to push it out of your mind, right? You shouldn't do that. But also, you know what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't be like, ooh, rice. Well, I like rice with this and rice with that. And I like that kind of rice better than this kind of rice, right? You're getting attached to it and you're thinking more and more about it, right? So when you get distractions, when thoughts or something arise in your mind while you're meditating, it's okay, right? What you try not to want to do is try to get angry or attached. You just want to try to come back to your breath, right? When you get anxious, so when you get distracted away, you understand, okay, I've been distracted. Then you try to let go. So letting go is just like I explained. You don't want to try to get angry and push it away or try to get attached to it. You just try to give it no energy. You know what I mean? It means that you don't try to put any mental energy into it. Just let it be. Okay? And then you come back to the breath. And so as a meditator, even if you've been meditating for years, you might start on the breath. And within 10 minutes of following your breath, you've been distracted 50 times. And that's normal. That's okay. Right? So you keep practicing. You keep coming back to the breath. The breath is like your home, right? You might go out and you travel and then you come back to the breath. Over and over again, you're coming back to the breath. And what that's doing is two things. First, that is training your mind where you want the mind to be. The mind wants to be on the breath, right? And especially once you start seeing that the breath is very calm and peaceful and happy, and how the mind is really my mind wants to say annoying, but it's really heavy. It's really tiring and exhausting for your mind always to be going everywhere about all kinds of things, right? But when you're able to have your mind, after practicing, your mind comes peaceful and quiet, and you realize, oh, I like this. This is wonderful, right? So you do that, but also the other reason why you practice in this way is that you understand how the mind works. You understand what happens. The mind, after a minute, it gets bored and it wants to go do something else. It wants to think about something. It wants to do something. It goes away, right? Because the breath is really boring to the mind, especially in the beginning. But my preceptor, the monk who ordained me, Bhante Gunaratana, he always said that if the breath is boring, then you're doing it wrong, right? And I didn't believe him for years. I said, but then I started to understand, now I understand, right? But until then, your mind is going to always go away. It's going to do different things. But if you're trying to do a sitting practice, whatever it is, like, you know, in the Pali, in the Theravada canon, there's 40 different, you know, ways that you can, objects of meditation. The one that's most common and most taught by the Buddha in the suttas is following your breath. But either way, it's the same. You're putting your attention on an object, right? And so when you do that over and over and over and over again, it makes your mind calm and peaceful and tranquil, right? So that's what you're trying to do. And for most people, that's the first many, many years, right? There's lots of deeper states of concentration and things like that. But for most people, it takes many, many, many years to worry about that. So for you right now, just worry about coming back to the breath, just coming back to the breath. The breath is very peaceful, very calm. I have a nephew. When I left to become a monk, he was 10, who I helped raise. And I taught him from the time he was like 4 or 5, like if he was angry or something, stop and breathe, right? Just stop and follow the breath. Follow the breath. When he was young, he liked to meditate. After about 10, he said, I don't want to meditate anymore. But I taught him this, to follow the breath. You always come back to the breath, because that's home and that's where peaceful, quiet. And so this is when you meditate, if there's nothing that you need to think about, it's just that you're trying to focus on an object, right? And your mind is going to think, and that's okay. So you just understand that eventually you want to let it go and come back to the breath. It's just like if you're training, just like a habit, like you're learning how to ride a bike or play the piano or whatever, you're training your mind to come back to the breath. Okay. So that's a very basic, the most basic, what they call samatha meditation, most basic practice in developing calm and tranquility in the mind. Right. So, and then once you do that, whenever you get anxious or worried or anything or angry, you can say, So this is what I taught my nephew. I say, remember to breathe, right? And this is what I tell people. That's one of my mottos. Remember to breathe, right? That could mean that remember to do your meditation for the day. It could also mean remember to, if you're anxious or angry or something, you can stop and you can breathe, right? And then you can think more clearly. So.
Does it matter, Bande? Let's say if you do 10 minutes meditations, and then the first 5 minutes, your mind is like going everywhere. And then on the last 5 minutes, you say, all right, that's enough. Now let's be serious, and then keep focusing for the last 5 minutes. Is that okay as well?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you know how many times I did like an hour meditation and the first 50 minutes were all kinds of, and then like the last 10 minutes peace, and then ding, and the meditation's over. Yeah. That happens. That happens. We don't know. See, each time you sit down to meditate, or you do walking meditation, or you do any kind of meditation, you don't know how it's going to be, right? So we don't want to attach to our meditation should be one way or another, right? Especially like so sometimes you might have a really peaceful meditation, especially if you're a newer meditator. You get like beginner's luck meditations where you meditate really nice and it's very peaceful, and then you get excited to want to do it again. But then you go back the next day or later that day and you meditate, and your meditation is not peaceful at all, and your mind is thinking about everything. It's like a battlefield, your mind, right? Yeah. And you get disheartened. You say, why can't I have that kind of meditation, right? But the more you do it, the more you realize is each time, like in Zen, they have this concept of beginner's mind, right? Coming to something. And so every time you sit down, you should try not to have any expectations of what your meditation is going to be. No matter how, to me, if you sat down, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes, that's a victory, right? That you actually practiced. That's good, right? Because that'll lead you to wanting to practice more in the future, right? And also your mind, Mara in your mind is going to be all kinds of, you don't need to practice. You don't need to meditate. You worked hard today, just rest or just do this, right? But you say, no, I'm going to practice, right? Yeah. And you sit down and it's for 5 minutes. And for 5 minutes, you couldn't follow your breath once. It's still okay. You still, you actually, because you sat down, you won. That was a good meditation. That was a good meditation because you actually did it. Yeah. Right. Because of how your mind was or anything like that, you can't judge because your mind, the Buddha says that, what is it? If it was to take something as self, because a Brahmin was talking to him about what you should take as self, the body or the mind. And so the Buddha says, if you were actually to take something as self, it's better to take the body as self than the mind, because the body doesn't change as fast. The mind changes really quick. Right? Bhante Silananda, who's one of the Sri Lankan monks who was with me at Bhavana, he's somebody who I remember even from a layperson. He would always say, mind is the fastest energy. Right? The mind is always going. So you can't depend on your mind that even though you follow the same instructions, right? If you cook something, if you follow the same recipe, does it always come out the same every time?
No.
Not always. Every time it's a little different, right? So the same time, every time you meditate, even though you follow, okay, I'm going to follow my breath, I'm going to do this, etc., etc., each time it's going to be different because there's different causes and conditions that are going to make that meditation different. Each day there's going to be different things. So you don't want to worry too much about what happens in your meditation. The most important thing is that you are consistently meditating, right? And even time, don't worry, especially for beginners. I tell people, don't worry about time. Don't try to say, I have to sit for 30 minutes because your mind's going to fight against you, right? So what you want to do is you just say, I want to sit, right? And then if it's 5 minutes, if it's 10 minutes, that's fine. Then you're done, right? But the fact that you meditate, if you meditate every day, then the benefits happen and you just want to meditate. Remember how this was before the live stream, but I think it's hard that we were talking about times and things. And I talked about how all of a sudden I went from somebody who wanted to stay up and play video games till 2 o'clock in the morning to somebody who wanted to wake up in the morning to meditate and listen to Dhamma talks and to do exercise and things like that. And that only happened because I wanted to do it. That only happened because I saw the benefit of it so deeply that it's like I actually wanted to change my life to do it, right? So as you develop that desire, then you'll want to meditate longer. Then it doesn't matter how much I meditated or oh man, I was really bad this whole hour at meditation. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you consistently keep doing the practice. Right? That's the most important thing. You keep doing the practice. And even if you stop for a week or a month, you want to go back to it, right? You keep doing it over and over and over again.
So by just sitting down, you already show effort.
Yes, exactly. That's a very good way of putting it.
It's not like lowering the bar.
No.
Not lowering the bar.
No, the fact that because it can be so hard to actually sit down, to me, when I'm able to kind of conquer Mara and get to that point where I was able to sit down, I felt accomplished. Oh, I did something good, right? And so that's that's important because you could have not bothered even sitting down. You could have not bothered even trying. You could have. There's been all kinds of excuses. I remember when I'd be the evening meditations at Bhavana Society, and I worked a lot at Bhavana Society, working, running lots of things and, chopping wood and doing all kinds of things. And it would be like 7:30 and I'd be tired and I'd be walking meditation or whatever. And Mara, my mind would be like, you're tired. You did a lot of work today. Just go to bed, just rest, just go read or whatever.
Take a break.
Right? Take a break. Exactly. And, I would say most of the time, because I had been practicing for a long time by that point, I said, no, I was very determined. I said, no, I'm going to meditate. But then 5 minutes later, Mara comes back in another angle. But you should, don't meditate because of this. And then sometimes, you know what? I'd actually be fooled by that. Mara would convince me. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's time for me to stop. Right. Right. So, but I was still happy that I actually resisted it the first time. Right. I'm not an awakened being. It's okay. I'm not going to be perfect at this. I'm going to keep practicing, keep trying, keep learning. And the fact that I was able to stay for those extra 5 more minutes, I consider that a win. I consider, okay, that was good. I'm moving forwards. Buddha says, don't be masters in backsliding, like going backwards. Don't be masters in going backwards.
Yeah.
Always try to move forwards, even if it's just a little bit.
Yeah.
Even if it's just an inch.
Yeah.
You move forward, then you're practicing, you're doing well, you're moving towards peace and awakening and lessening your suffering.
Yeah.
If you just totally stop, then you go backwards. That's
Yeah.
not good, because you're still stuck in samsara.
Yeah.
You're still stuck in the uncertainty of existence in
Yeah.
samsara.
So to follow up that my question again, Bante, and also what you just stated, you kept mentioning Mara as your evil minds, for example, right? Now, would that help if you personalize that evil mind as someone, as Mara, at this point, to help you, improve your training?
Well, I'm okay with both. In the suttas, the Buddha essentially uses Mara as the part of your mind that wants to do unskillful things, but also Mara is a being that's in samsara. So I kind of view it as both.
Okay.
Like I don't really make a distinction per se. Like I don't have, when I was younger, I kind of had this feeling of like, I don't want to believe in other beings and all these kind of things.
Yeah.
I had that feeling like, I would have been like, no, it's just the mind.
Yeah.
There's no real Mara.
Yeah.
But now I don't mind it either way. It doesn't bother me, because Mara is just another being in samsara, just like devas, just like, just like humans, just like animals, just like, so because I've come to a provisional acceptance of this system, then to me, Mara is just another being. But there is also this part of your mind that is always seeking for you to do bad things, always seeking for you to be unskillful, right? You can say that's the defilements in your mind. You can say that, personifying Mara and saying that's Mara in your mind.
Yeah.
That's fine too. What it is it's understanding that there are, Thanissaro Bhikkhu calls it the committee of the mind, right? There's parts of your mind that really want to practice Dhamma, that love meditation. And then there's parts of your mind that hate Dhamma and hate meditation, right? And they're kind of a committee. They're kind of arguing over in your mind, like who should be dominant, right? Like in the Judeo-Christian, tradition, they have like on your shoulder, one is a devil and an angel, right? So there's that kind of concept that there is a Mara inside of us, whether you believe it's, whether you want to just have it as a personification or an actual being, there is a Mara that is basically seeking for you to be unskillful, right? And the more we kind of indulge that Mara, the more unskillful habits that we build, right? And the more suffering we cause ourselves and others. So as opposed to, we understand in the suttas, right, in the Therigatha, the verses of the elder bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, right? You see so many times they're meditating wonderfully in the forest, and then Mara comes, right? Like comes over their shoulder and says, why you should do that? You should go back and enjoy sensual pleasures. And they say, I see you, Mara. And then and it says Mara was dejected, said, oh, they've seen me, and Mara goes away, right? So this you can see that as an actual being, or if you don't like that, you can see it as part of your mind that's coming up in meditation saying, why are you doing this? That you should do more important things, right? And you say, no, I see you, Mara. I'm going to sit here and meditate. So either way is or both.
Do both.
I don't mind doing both. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Any more questions? How about from Zoom? The audience? Oh, it's already past 11.
Yeah.
All right. I think it's a good time to close. All right. So there's some announcement that I would like to make. For next week, we're gonna have another puja with Bante Damiko from Indonesia, and we're gonna start at 9 o'clock in the morning, New York time, or in Pacific time is 6 o'clock. I'm sorry, it's a little bit early because in Indonesia it's already late as well. So that's the reason we push it by an hour. And the following week we're gonna have Bante Jayasaro again, if you don't mind, Bante.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like this morning, perhaps we're gonna start a little bit like around 9:45.
Yeah, 9:30,
it's
9:45,
Enough
yeah.
time for us to get to have a Q&A at the
Mhm.
end for like half an hour. And for you who wants to give dana to us in Indonesia, we have a base account atas nama Indrawati Citra with the account numbers 137-141-2889. Or if you have access to Zelle or PayPal, you can send your dana to wipadany@gmail.com. And please confirm the dana goes toward Indonesian Buddhist Family of New York. All right. Thank you again for joining us, and we're gonna close with Nama Karapata, Bante. And thank you so much again, Bante.
Thank you.
Arahang sama sambuddho bhagava Buddhang bhagawantang abhiwademi. Sang Bhagawa yang maha suci, yang telah mencapai penerangan sempurna, aku bersujud di hadapan Sang Buddha, Sang Bhagawa. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Telah sempurna dipaparkan oleh Sang Bhagawa, aku bersujud di hadapan Dhamma. Supatipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sanghang namami. Sangha siswa Sang Bhagawa telah bertindak sempurna, aku bersujud di hadapan Sangha. Sabe sata bawantu sukhitata. Semoga semua makhluk hidup berbahagia. May all beings be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us give respect to Bante Jayasara. Okasa Wandani Bante.
Sukhya. Sukhya. Sukhya.
Thank you, Bante. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Bye-bye. See you again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Boleh? Makasih.